Greetings, traveller. I see the road has been long, and the night has laid itself on your shoulders like a heavy cloak. Come closer to the fire. Make yourself comfortable. Let the warmth of the hearthstone be your ally. Let the flames whisper slowly, like an old friend who knows that silence is sometimes the gentlest answer. The road stretches onward, always onward, but tonight it pauses here. The forest listens, the river breathes slow beyond the reeds, and above us the stars burn with patient indifference. In such a place, stories are not hurried. They unfold at the pace of firewood crackling, at the pace of smoke climbing into the dark. And so, I will tell you a story. A story not of crowns and battles, but of quiet roads and the choices that weigh heavier than swords. A story of sleep and of a village where dreams clung too tightly. A story of a witcher who carried steel on his back and questions in his heart. Let the night be long. Let the fire burn low. The tale begins. The road that day had seemed endless. A scar carved deep into the earth. Dust clung to my tongue, and mud clung to my boots. The weight of steel pressed into my shoulders, not cruelly, but with the steady reminder that a witcher's burden is not something easily laid aside. By nightfall, the land had grown still. Not the sharp stillness before a storm, but a deep and weary quiet, as though the fields themselves had grown tired of whispering to the wind. I find a clearing not far from the river, a hollow in the trees where the grass lay pressed flat. Deer had bedded here, perhaps, or wolves. The place smelled of moss and water and old roots. It would do. I gathered branches, brittle and grey, and coaxed them into flame. The fire caught reluctantly, then eagerly, until sparks leapt skyward like fragments of constellations torn loose. Its light drew a circle around me, fragile but sure. Beyond it, the forest gathered itself in knots of shadow, listening. There are nights when silence is sharp, cutting into the ear like a blade. There are nights when silence presses heavy, a cloak damp with rain. And then there are nights like this, when silence becomes companion, not cruel, not kind, but present. The sort of silence that seems to listen back. I set down my swords, steel for men, silver for monsters, earth and sky. They lay beside me on the ground, weight honest and patient. There is a kind of faith in laying down one's weapons, even for an hour. A quiet prayer to the notion that not every shadow hides teeth. Sleep did not come quickly. Instead came memory. There had been a boy once, in a village not unlike the one I would soon find. Not a witcher, not a soldier, just a child with eyes too wide for his face, hands too small to hold certainty. His people had called me, whispering of a wraith in the fields. They were wrong. It had been nothing but fog on the barley, light bending on the dew. Yet fear is a creature that thrives on little, and in the boy it had found a home. He clung to his mother's sleeve, shivering, unable to loose his breath. I had given him a trinket, no true medallion, not even a charm, only a coin of silver, scratched with a crude line, meaningless to any mage, powerless to ward away curse or spectre. Yet the boy had taken it as though it were salvation itself. He held it with both hands, trembling ceased, and in his eyes I saw the kindling of belief. If fear comes, I told him, hold this. Cold will tell you what is real. Simple words, perhaps too simple. I had thought the coin would serve him for a night, perhaps a week. Yet years have passed, and still I recall the sight of his fingers curling around that silver. Sometimes it seems that I gave him not a coin, but a piece of my own armor. Sometimes I wonder if I parted with something I would one day need. The fire crackled, wood bending into ash. Above, the branches of the trees interlaced against the stars, their shadows shifting. Each branch seemed to trace a path, a road leading outward into darkness. And all roads, in time, lead back to memory. That night, I felt the weight of something ahead, though I could not yet name it. A village, they had said, where people slept too deeply, where children smiled in their dreams but never woke to laugh. Some called it sickness, others curse. To me, it was simply another knot in the world's tapestry, twisted and waiting to be undone. The flames bent low with the wind, whispering. In their glow I sat alone with thought, waiting for dawn to draw me further north. The river whispered beyond the trees, a sound soft enough to be mistaken for breath. Its waters carried the smell of silt and reed, and each ripple seemed to speak of things older than the path I walked. I listened, as I always did. The world tells its stories quietly. A witcher learns to hear them, or he does not live long. The night deepened. Shadows stretched long, bending across the fire. I turned the bread I had carried, letting its crust warm against the flame. It was hard, stale from travel, but the heat softened it. Hunger had never asked for perfection. Owls called again, 2 of them now, their voices answering one another from opposite sides of the wood. It comforted me in a way. Predators, yes, but honest ones. An owl asks nothing more than what hunger demands. Men, I have learned, are rarely so simple. The thought drew me back to the boy, to fear, and to the strange weight it wears. It is heavier than armor, more suffocating than chains, but it can be set down, if only for a moment, with the right lie. Was it a lie, what I gave him? A line on a coin, a whisper about cold and truth. Perhaps. But sometimes lies save better than swords. The fire shifted, a log collapsed inward, sending sparks spiraling. I watched them rise until they vanished into the night. Once, Vesemir had said to me, "A spark is a story. It lives only as long as it burns, so tell it well, before the dark takes it." He had spoken over a fire not unlike this one. Many winters passed. Kermoren had stood silent under snow, wolves pacing the outer walls. We had sat near the great hearth, few in number, each carrying silence heavier than words. I had been younger then, too proud to ask what his proverb truly meant. Now, older, I find myself understanding too late. A spark, a story, a boy, a coin, a village ahead where dreams take root too deep. The medallion at my chest stirred faintly, silver wolf vibrating against the skin. Not much, only a quiver, the way a dog twitches in sleep. The forest was quiet, but not empty. The earth remembers, the dead remember, and memory, once woken, does not return easily to rest. I let my hand rest on the medallion until it grew still. Then I leaned back, watching the fire gnaw at its wood, and let thought wander further than the road allowed. Why do I walk it still? That question returns often. Coin, yes. The contract, yes. But also because the road itself demands there are knots in the world that no priest untangles, no knight dares face, no villager dares name. If not me, then who? The stars shifted overhead, wheeling in their patient dance. They have always been indifferent. A man may live and die beneath them, his choices swallowed like rain into soil, and they will shine the same. There is comfort in that, a strange, cold comfort. The fire burned lower. Its warmth touched only half my face now, the other side lost to night. I pulled my cloak tighter and listened once more. The forest gave nothing back. Still, something lingered. A weight in the air. A waiting. I thought again of the stories in the inn at the last crossing. The ferryman who spoke of children smiling in their sleep. Of candles burning through the night. Of a priest whose words calmed the fog only to summon it anew. I had listened then, nodded once and said little. But the road had bent my steps toward their village all the same. Not out of curiosity, not out of pity, but because some silences grow too heavy to be ignored. The night thinned toward morning, black softened into blue, blue into the grey of mist. The river brightened faintly, its surface silvered. Birds stirred in the reeds. My fire had burned to embers, red as old wounds, glowing stubbornly against the cold. I rose, scattering ash with my boot, and slung the swords across my back. The steel was cold, familiar. My cloak carried the smell of smoke, the kind that clings for days, long after the fire dies. The horse whickered where she had been tied, stamping once against the damp soil. She tossed her head as if impatient. I placed a hand on her neck, felt the heat of muscle beneath the hide. She was steady, as she had always been. Better company than most men. I untied the reins, led her to the road. The east had begun to pale, though the sun was not yet risen. Mist lay thick across the river, slow, deliberate, curling upward like the breath of something sleeping. And as I looked at it, I knew this was no ordinary fog. It carried weight, as though each tendril bore memory with it. A sleeping plague, they had called it. Sleep too deep, dreams too strong. The road curved north into that mist. I followed. Not out of curiosity, not out of pity, but because some silences grow too heavy to be ignored. The east began to pale, the kind of grey light that steals the edges from things. Fog drifted low over the river, curling like smoke, wrapping itself around reeds and posts. My horse stamped once, impatient, her breath rising in clouds that vanished quickly in the damp. I doused the fire with a kick of earth. Embers hissed, smoke coiled upward, and the clearing returned to shadow. The smell of ash clung to my cloak, a scent I had carried so many nights. It had become a part of me. The road waited. Always it waits. As I mounted, I looked once more at the trees. Their trunks were dark, their crowns blurred by mist. Yet I felt them watching, old and quiet, as though they had seen travellers before me. Men with swords, women with baskets, children with laughter, and remembered them all. Fear, memory, silence, These were the true companions of the road. Monsters could be cut down, curses broken, plagues endured. But silence always returned, heavier with each step. I urged the horse forward. The path bent north, vanishing into fog. The river flowed alongside, steady and unbothered, carrying with it the weight of forgotten stories. And as I rode into the mist, I knew this would not be a tale of easy victories or simple monsters. This was a tale of sleep, of dreams that clung too deep, and of a village waiting for someone foolish enough or stubborn enough to listen. The moon rose pale and full, its light caught in the slow current of the river that followed the road. The water broke the reflection into silver shards, each piece trembling with the movement of reeds. The night was cool, not bitter, but sharp enough to make the horse's breath visible, rising in steady plumes. The path curved with the river, carved by countless wheels and hooves. Stones pressed upward through the soil like the bones of giants long buried. Each step of my mare struck hollow, a rhythm that echoed between the trees and across the surface of the water. It was a steady rhythm, one that spoke not of haste but of endurance. The land was wide here, stubble from the last harvest scratched against the sky, broken fields stretching into shadow. Far off, windmills hunched against the horizon, their arms motionless. The smell of damp earth hung heavy in the air, laced with the faint tang of iron, the promise of water and stone. I let the horse set her pace. There was no reason to hurry. The sickness would not vanish before dawn, nor would truth change its face if I reached the village sooner. Roads teach patience, or else they break those who travel them. I had learned that lesson too many times to forget. Kaer Morhen came to mind as the night deepened. Memories have their own rhythm, as steady as hoofbeats. The keep had known nights like this, cloaked in silence, wind gnawing at the stones. I remembered the great hall lit only by embers, Fezimir's voice reciting names, those gone, those never to be forgotten. Each name had carried weight, heavier than steel, heavier than years. Memory lingers longer than scars, and it burns colder than silver.
The horse flicked her ears, restless. Her hooves struck harder, breath quickening. I followed her gaze toward the river, where fog crept upward from the water. It slithered across the ground, pale tendrils weaving between reeds. Not thick, not cruel, but purposeful. It spread with the patience of something alive. The medallion at my neck quivered once, faintly. I laid a hand upon it, feeling the tremor against my palm. Not strong, not urgent, just a whisper, as if the air itself carried a memory. I thought then of the boy and the coin, of his small hands clutching cold metal. Fear had clung to him as fog clings to water. And just as fog waits for morning, fear waits for night. The road bent toward a ferry crossing. Posts rose from the water, worn and crooked, ropes tethering boats that knocked softly against the current. Their hulls were black against the moonlight, heavy shapes rocking as if in uneasy sleep. A light burned on the opposite bank, faint but steady. An inn squatted close to the water, roof sagging, beams dark with years of smoke. The smell of wood fire drifted across the river, mingled with bread and the sharper tang of ale. I dismounted, leading the horse by her reins. Her hooves thudded against the planks of the ferry bridge, the sound hollow as a drum. Mist clung low to the water, rising in coils that curled about her legs. She tossed her head, uneasy. I stroked her mane, steadying her with touch. The inn door stood crooked on its hinges, but golden light leaked from its cracks. Voices murmured within, low and overlapping, the drone of men who have spoken to one another, too long to need words. A lute plucked a melody that bent with age, strings whining, familiar yet worn thin. I tied the horse to a post, her reins slipping against wood polished smooth by countless hands. She snorted once, then lowered her head to graze at the damp grass. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Warmth struck my face, heavy with the scent of smoke, stew, and wet straw. Heads turned, eyes catching on steel and silver, then turned away again. A stranger was worth a glance, but not more. I stepped inside. The floor near the door had been strewn with rushes that had long since surrendered their scent to smoke and boots. Candles guttered in iron sconces along the walls. The wicks bent low, as if even flame grew tired here toward midnight. A long table held men with shoulders bowed by work and winter. Their coats steamed faintly where fog had clung to wool. I crossed to the space beside the hearth. The fire was a low, patient thing, more embers than flame, but it gave the kind of warmth that seeped into knuckles and stayed. A woman with a kerchief tied at the nape of her neck brought a bowl and a heel of bread without speaking. The stew was thick and brown, lentils and root, a sliver of pork bone whitening the broth, herbs clinging to the rim. The salt had been pinched carefully, the way people pinch anything that must last the season. The innkeeper watched me over the lip of a mug he wiped with a cloth already clean. His apron was the colour of smoke. His eyes were the colour of river stones. Ferryman said riders saw you on the far path, he said at last. His voice had the rasp of splinters. Road's been empty since market day. It has a way of emptying when fog grows bold, I said. He nodded toward my left shoulder, as if the medallion were a question he had decided not to ask aloud. I broke the bread, soaked it in the stew, and ate. The taste was honest. The quiet that followed was more honest still. Along the wall, a man with chapped hands and a fringe of straw still clinging to his sleeves spoke without looking at me. "River's been strange," he said to no one in particular. "Nets lie soft in the water. Fish don't trouble them." "Fish learn," muttered another. "They learn the fog." The lute in the corner found a tune and lost it again, like a man chasing a memory. The player was an old fellow with a back bowed like a sickle, fingers wide at the knuckles, nails rimmed dark. He plucked the strings with care, not for coin, but for habit. Music is a kind of work too. On the sill above the hearth sat 3 stubs of candle, their stumps fused by a lake of old wax. One had been pressed with a fingerprint, the whorl still clear. Someone had done it without thinking, or else to leave something of themselves behind in a place that remembers very little. "Rooms?" asked the innkeeper. "Hay," I said. "Rope and a bucket." He grunted, approving of a man who didn't ask for more than he needed. "Stables dry, lofts clean. If you put your swords where I can see them, the boy won't go poking." "The boy will not go poking," I said. He took my coin, weighed it between finger and thumb, and slid it into the apron, as if adding a word to a sentence. Around us, conversation droned and thinned, swelled and drifted, a tide of talk that neither advanced nor retreated. In it, I heard what I had come expecting to hear. A priest whose voice smoothed the air for a night, a fog that returned at its own pace, children who smiled in sleep, the way the living smile in sunlight. "The barrow," someone said, quiet as a thought. "Ah," said another. The shape of the sound neither agreement nor denial. "Stones older than our fathers' fathers," a third murmured. "Ground that won't plough true. You can leave seed there if you like, but it grows names before it grows barley." I finished the stew. The woman took the bowl, her fingers red from water that had not been warmed enough. "River's falling," she said to the room in general, not to me. "Posts show their ribs." "Spring will right it," the innkeeper said. "Spring rights what men do wrong," she replied, "not what the dead do."
The door opened to let in a slice of fog and a pair of men with the damp set into their coats. They stamped their boots, shook their sleeves, nodded to the innkeeper, and took their places along the wall. One set a candle stub upon the table before him and lit it from the hearth's ember, cupping the flame with a palm that had known both rope and blade. The stub flickered, flared, and steadied. He watched it the way a man watches a small animal he hopes will live. I took my leave of the fire and stepped back into the night. The fog pressed gentle at the threshold, not curious, not bold, but insistent. It found the seams in cloak and collar and laid its cool upon my skin like a hand that meant no harm and offered none. In the stable, the mare turned her head, ears pricked. She had not eaten much of the hay. Beasts do not relish damp in their feed. I brushed the dewline from her flank and checked the girth as if I intended to ride again, though the hour said otherwise. The loft smelled of straw and old apples, of mouse and leather. A ladder leaned up to it, polished by feet more careful than mine. I climbed and lay back upon the bales, cloak under my head, scabbards within reach. Through the boards of the stable wall, the river made its small voice. The sound of water is a constant that can make a man forget he is not a stone. I let it enter the place in the mind where counting happens, and the world grew simple. Across the yard, a barn door shifted on its hinge and settled. Beyond that, the inn breathed in a slow tide. Talk dwindling, chairs scraping gently. A last mug set down, the soft step of the woman as she gathered bowls. Somewhere a dog turned twice and slept. I dozed without falling fully away. Witcher sleepwalks along the edge. It is a path without fences. In it, the smallest stir can move a hand toward a hilt, and the smallest comfort can move a thought toward a kinder memory. I let both be true. In that half sleep, a recollection passed across me like the shadow of a bird. A field in summer, barley bent under weight of dew. The air so clear the world seemed made of glass. A boy held silver in his hands and believed. I could not say whether the memory was gentle or cruel. It did not matter. It stayed, then moved on, the way fog passes a fence post and leaves it wet but standing. Toward dawn, the stable cooled further. The color of the world shifted from black to blue to ash. My medallion stirred once, a faint tapping against the collarbone, and was still. I listened for a cause and heard only water. Sometimes the cause is farther than the ear can reach. When I rose, the hay had pressed its pattern into the leather of my sleeve. I brushed it away, set the cloak, and went down. The mare snorted, shook her neck, and stamped. Impatience is a language that needs no interpreter. I cinched the girth and led her out. The fog had thinned into ragged strips that hung low over the ground like torn cloth. The inn's door gaped open, the rushes inside swept into a new geometry. The woman ladled porridge into bowls and set them on a board near the hearth. The innkeeper had his hands around a mug the way a man wraps both palms around the only warm thing he owns. He did not pretend surprise at my early hour. "North?" he asked. "North," I said. He glanced beyond my shoulder toward the river, as if answers hovered there where morning tugged silver from the water. "The road forks at the older stump," he said. "Right branch keeps to the bank. Left bends inland along a rise. Bank is shorter. Rise is drier." "Bank," I said. "Mist keeps to water." "Aye," he said, not in agreement but in acknowledgement of a choice made. A boy, perhaps the one warned from poking, appeared in the doorway with a bundle of reeds longer than he was tall. He stood examining me as if he could add something to a picture already sketched 100 times in his mind. I inclined my head. He did the same, solemn as a magistrate. When he passed, the ends of the reeds clicked like bones. I ate a bowl of porridge with a smear of honey laid thin across its face. The sweetness did not belong to this room. It was a summer taste, a field taste, and for an instant, the tongue remembered clover. It passed. Most things do. Coins changed hands. They were neither more nor less than the measure of what had been given. I stepped into the yard. The sky had climbed one shade lighter. A heron unfolded from the reed bank and lifted itself across the river with the patience of a scribe unrolling a scroll. The road took me back to the posts and the slow knock of hulls. On the far side, a line of alders traced the bank. Their roots knuckled into the earth and drank what they were owed. I let the mare find her pace, and we moved along the path that had been worn by those who had come and would come again. The fog did not leave so much as thin. It became a veil that the day could not quite lift, a layer between leaf and light. Sound moved strangely in it. The splash of a fish at the surface, the whisper of a vole in the reeds, the distant clank of someone adjusting a chain on a ferry. Each arrived intact but without a place to stand, as if sound had lost its shadow. A mile on, the road narrowed to pass between the river and a low bank of meadow. There an alder had fallen, its trunk half in the water, half on shore. The bark had peeled in long tongues, a sap smell hung beneath the damp. On the exposed roots, silt had settled in rings mapped by the river's withdrawing breath. I dismounted and led the mare around, hand on the bridle, palm against the warmth of her cheek when she hesitated at the slick mud. Beneath the fallen tree I saw footprints, not fresh, not old. The edges had softened the way edges do when nights are long with dew. Children's feet by the size of them, bare by the neat round of each toe. They led toward the river and away again, as if play had been interrupted and then resumed, or as if the river had called and been denied. I crouched. The fog beaded on my hair and lashes, and when I blinked it gathered itself into drops and fell. The medallion did not stir, yet I felt that same weight in the air as at the fire. Not a threat, but a presence. The way a church holds air different from a stable. The way a battlefield holds air different from a field of flax.
The hoof print of a draft horse overlapped the children's marks, and above that, a man's boot, heel worn to one side. The boot had passed later, after some hours, and in a hurry. The drag of the leather at the toe said as much. The road keeps such records without caring who reads them. I stood, wiped my palm on my cloak and swung back into the saddle. The mare shook her mane and we moved on. The path rose gently and then fell, and as it fell, the land opened enough to show the first low roofs of the village through the mist. Thatch made a line against the grey. A fence of withies leaned inward, as if listening. Beyond the fence a dog lifted its head but did not bark. It watched, considered, and lay it back down. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys only, and both reluctant. In front of a door a bucket had been overturned, with a little ring of water around its lip. A handprint shone on the door's board where someone had pushed it closed with wet fingers. I have seen towns hold their breath before. It makes the same shape of silence everywhere. A girl sat on a porch step, flax hair braided tight enough to shine. Her feet were bare, soles grey with the colour of morning. She looked at me with the kind of attention that wastes nothing. I raised a hand no higher than the pommel in acknowledgement. She did not move, did not call out, did not run inside. She simply watched the way one watches the river in flood, aware that it may rise, aware that it may not. At the end of the lane a building stood that had learned to be 2 things without being either fully. Once a barn by its bones, now a shrine by its patience. Ribbons hung from the lintel, their colours washed to something between memory and thread. Herbs had been tied to the eaves in bunches. Sage, yarrow, something bitter, and smoke had tanned them to the colour of cured leather. Candles had been set in little clay cups along the threshold, their wick ends blackened, their bodies pooled and hardened where they had once bled. I did not dismount there. Not yet. The fog drew lines in the yard like chalk. It left the steps clear and sat higher at the fence. I rode past and let the mare come to a halt where the lane met the river's bend. The water here slowed, as if pausing to think. From the shrine came a murmur, a man's voice, low, deliberate. The kind of voice that makes a claim upon the air. It did not carry words so much as weight. Men fall asleep to such voices, taking them for safety because they are heavy. The medallion touched my chest once and lay still. I turned the mare and let her walk back toward the yard. The girl's gaze followed me, not with hope, not with fear, but with the inventory a housekeeper keeps of things set on a shelf. I put my palm to my thigh and felt the pull of leather. I felt the habit of the road lay itself along my spine. Chapter 1 ends where a path meets a door. The road had taken me to the threshold of a place that could be entered, refused, or circled. I chose to enter. I swung from the saddle, set my boots to the packed earth, and looped the reins over the post so loosely a gentle tug would free them. The mare lowered her head to grass that had no reason to grow there and grew anyway. I mounted the shrine's 3 steps and crossed into the dim. Candles made a dull honey of the air. Ribbons lifted in the draught and fell again. Herbs crackled faintly, as if remembering the sun. A man stood with hands resting on a table of rough planks, gaunt, careful, eyes that knew how to weigh a question before it was asked. His hair held the color of ash. When he looked at me, his mouth adopted the shape of a smile that had been practiced before a mirror. Not warm, not unkind, useful. "You walk in another's sickness," he said. His voice was the color of fog. "Plagues do not ask permission to cross a threshold," I said. "They come." He nodded once, as if I had proved a point he had written in his book long ago. Behind him, the small clay cups of wax waited, each with a wick clipped close. On the table lay a book whose pages had buckled with old damp. Next to it a ribbon, red once, now the color of rose hips left too long on the bush. "Names," he said. "That is all. We keep the names in order. We light them. We lay them to rest. When order frays, the fog rises." "And when the fog rises," I said, "order profits." He smiled wider, but only with his lips. "A witcher," he said, "steel and silver, earth and sky." "Names," I said. He set his fingertips to the book as a man might settle them upon an instrument about to be played. "Come," he said, "let us speak softly of what you seek." The dead are easily roused by a careless tongue. I had come to the door. I had crossed the threshold. The road folded itself behind me like a map. The mare chewed grass outside. The river went on telling the same story it is always told. In the dim, with wax and herb and ribbon hanging motionless, I listened to a voice that had learned to live inside a fog. And the medallion lay against my skin and did not move. By the time the road pressed me to the ferry, the river had folded the night into its slow black. 2 poles rose from the bank like staves of a psalm, tethering a flat barge whose timbers sighed whenever the current remembered to push. A lantern swung at the mooring post, yellow, patient, a poor moon for men who had business after dark. Across the yard, the inn hungered low as a plough horse at rest. Smoke drifted from its chimney in a thread the color of iron filings. The roof, long suffering under winters, had sagged slightly, as if trying to listen to the conversations it had sheltered. Shutters wore the fingerprints of years, grease, soot, rain, and the door leaned the way old men lean when they refuse to sit. Inside was warmth that had learned its manners. The hearth did the work and did not complain. Candles guttered in sconces, hammered from horseshoes. Reed rushes hushed the floor. The air carried stew and wet wool, and the wax sour of candles too often pinched out with spit. A lute released notes like breath through cracked lips. The tune knew many names and answered to none. Heads turned, they always do, at swords that make a cross of a man's back, at the grey of the coat that does not match a farmer's mud, at the medallion that glints and lies still. Then heads turn back because people prefer to finish their own stories
before they ask for another's. The innkeeper stood behind his plank as a miller stands by his cannel. Broad forearms, apron dark with the clean dirt of honest hours, face mapped with lines that did not contradict each other. His eyes were river stone grey. "Traveller," he said, not wasting either of us with a question we both knew. "You'll take the side bench. Fire's fair to that wall. Bread's fresh. Stew holds the spoon for you." "Bread and stew," I said. "Ale that remembers grain." He nodded. A woman in the kerchief slid a bowl to me before my coin had passed. Lentils, roots, a hint of caraway, a pork knuckle that had already done its talking to the broth. I ate slowly. Hunger learns its courtesy on the road. Men along the long table spoke in the way fields speak when wind walks them, bending first one way, then the other, never all at once. I let their talk crease around me until words began to keep each other's company. "Took the net and nothing troubled it, I tell you," said a thin man whose hands were a map of shallow cuts. Water lay on it like cloth. "Fish have their own prayers now. Fish go where sleep goes," replied a broad-shouldered one with chaff in his hair. "Every living thing does. Ask your dog what he dreams of when he whimpers. He dreams of catching what the day stole." "Dreams are for the dead," said a third, older, with that careful way of placing syllables that men learn after they've bitten too many. "The living have work." The lute found its courage and lost it again. The player was an old fellow with fingers like roots. He plucked the same line twice and made of it something kinder the second time, as if he had found the missing word. A beekeeper sat with his back to a post, smelling faintly of honey and smoke. A wicker skep leaned against his shin. He stirred his beer with a twig as if tasting last summer. "Wax is dear," he said to no one directly. "Traders stretched it with tallow 2 countings back, I'd swear. Burns wrong, smokes, leaves a throat like sawdust." "Priest doesn't taste with a throat," the straw-haired man said. "He tastes with a book. A book can stomach any candle. Laughter, not kind but not cruel." The innkeeper's cloth paused and moved again. He did not lift his eyes from what he wiped. He was listening, the way men listen who will have to live with the thing they hear after the stranger is gone. The porridge woman, call her martyr, for there is always a martyr wherever a hearth knows its work, set down another loaf on the board. Crust browned hard, a split along its spine like a healed wound. "Eat," she said to me, tone as neutral as bread. "It's better hot." "Everything is." A boy came in from the ferry side with a handful of alder cones. He shook his hands over the hearth to dry them, then stood at the edge of the room as if he had been told to stand exactly there, exactly so. His eyes took careful inventory of swords, boots, scabbards, faces. Boys do that. They collect shapes for later when no one is watching. The innkeeper saw him, and the boy remembered that he was meant to be running an errand. He ran. "Have you kept a candle against your door?" I asked, not loud. Questions can be stones or they can be rain. It depends how you throw them. The innkeeper answered with a breath that had to pass through his teeth before it became speech. "For knights that ask for one. There've been more asking of late. Not only in the village up the bank. River goes by every door. River leaves what it wants."
What does it leave? He cut a look toward the reed-screened corner where the old lute man had given up and was mending a string with a pin. The innkeeper weighed me the way men weigh weather. Quiet, he said. It leaves quiet. Like a blanket that's too heavy even when you're cold. Along the table, the straw-haired man continued to inform the world. Priest said the fog listens. Said names get loose in mist, the way calves get loose if you tie a knot one-handed. Said you keep names with light, that's why wax is dear. That's why traders leave light and take grain. Priest speaks, the beekeeper muttered into his cup. He speaks like a saw speaks to the plank, clean, sure, straight down. Leaves what he wants, the rest falls where it must. When does he speak? I asked. Evenings, Marta said, because she had been standing near, and women answering questions is how rooms continue to be rooms. When fog comes, sometimes when it only threatens to. He prays by the old barn. Oh, you know about it by now. He calls it shrine because men need a word to kneel to. He takes names in a book and he ties ribbons for them. Red for hearts, blue for the river, white for those who already went and were brought back. Once by luck and twice by stubbornness. Ribbons keep names, I said. If they're tied tight, said the beekeeper, not looking up. If they're tied to something that doesn't move when the wind does. My skeps don't wander off because I love them. They stay because I peg them into damp earth and check the pegs when the ground shrinks. So you peg your dead, the straw-haired man said, and they don't bump your walls at night. That's the notion. He turned to me finally, and his voice hardened the way bread hardens when it forgets water. You came to tell us a better one. I came to hear yours, I said. He balked at that and found himself without a speech. When a man expects iron and receives water, he forgets how to stand for a moment. At the far end, a pair of ferrymen added their coats to pegs and their words to the table. One had rope burns like pale bracelets across his palms. The other wore a cap that had seen 3 owners, 2 wars, and a wedding. They nodded to the innkeeper. He nodded back, a currency all its own. The barge knocked twice this afternoon without any hand near it, said Rope Palms, collecting without urgency the attention of those who counted knocks. Water lay like glass. Wind was shy, still it knocked. Posts shift, said the cap, purely for balance. Posts don't shift at prayers, Rope Palms said. It knocked when the priest sang, and it stopped after the last name. A woman at the table, farmer's wife by the dirt under her nails, strong by the way she handled her mug, said, "He sang my mother's name last week. It went quiet after. The quiet lasted until dawn. And your mother?" "Turned in her sleep," the woman said. She said it the way one might say, "The moon rose, the dog came back, the bread rose." She turned and smiled, and said the word for blackberries, the way she used to in summer when her hands were purple with them. "Did she wake?" I asked. "She said the word," the woman repeated, as if language were its own kind of waking. Silence then. Not the cupboard bare silence of rooms where no one has anything left to say, but the rich silence of rooms where saying more would spend too much. The innkeeper poured me ale. He found the edge of the mug and did not spill. "You'll want to ask up the bank," he said. "There's nothing to buy here but meat on the day the pig makes its gift, and wax on the day the trader makes his. The answers go dearer upriver. They go by candles and return by dawn." "When does the fog come?" I said.
When the lamp at the ferry fails to remember it's a lamp, he said. When it tries to be a moon and finds it can't. That hour. The door near the kitchen opened, sending a brief ribbon of cooler air like a hand across the room. Into it stepped a man with a soldier's back and a farmer's wrists. Scar along the jaw, a cheerful scar, if a scar can be, earned in a fight that had not ended bitter. He set down a bundle of alder sticks and a coil of thin rope. His eyes, the colour of ashes when they've forgotten their fire, rested on me and did not struggle with what they saw. Witcher, he said, without disdain or welcome, a greeting of fact. Havel, the innkeeper supplied, for names are introductions no matter who speaks them. He was north in a king's spring once, married Marta after Havel nodded, as if he and his past had agreed not to argue in public. There's stew left, he told me, though my bowl was empty. There's always stew left. Fog takes appetite's edge first. Does it take sleep next? I said.
It gives sleep, Marta said quietly. It gives it like milk. She scraped the bottom of a pot with the flat of her spoon, the sound a farmer's knife makes when it cleans a hoe. Children stop being afraid of the dark. That's what frightens. They smile, added the beekeeper. Simple as bees dancing in a comb, they think is sun. In the lull that followed, the lute player tried again, and this time achieved the lullaby in one pass. It slid over the tables like warm water, smoothing the burrs of talk. Rope palms closed his eyes. The cap tipped his head back. The farmer's wife pressed her thumb along the rim of her mug, feeling, perhaps, the faint vibration of sound as something touched and withdrew. Enough of that, the innkeeper said without heat. The lute quieted. A single note hung in the air, indecisive as a sparrow in a crosswind, and then chose the rafters and was done. Where does the priest live? I asked. In the barn that isn't, Havel said, by the river bend, sleeps on straw like we all do when we mean to remember the ground. He eats, I said. Everyone eats. Havel's mouth found the old scar and amused itself a moment. Some with their hands, some with their ears. What does he ask of you? Names, said the farmer's wife, before anyone else could spend courage on it, and wax, and ribbons coloured for the river and for blood, and to bring the children when fog arrives, so he can call them by what they were christened, not by what the fog would call them. And if you do not bring them, I said, then the fog comes to fetch them at the door, said Marta very evenly, as if this were a thing the room had agreed not to make her say. It finds cracks. Every house has a place where the wind learned a secret and keeps it. Fog learns faster. We keep watch, Havel added, arms folded, eyes open, candle between them. That much is ours to do. And does it answer? I said. It answers the priest, Rope Palm said, not opening his eyes. He sings, and it lies down. It does not go. It lies down the way a patient dog lies, watching the hand that told it so. I took the last of the bread and set the crust aside. The room had moved past the hour of boasting into the hour when men admit what they cannot fix. That hour ends either with sleep or with vows. Taverns are the same everywhere.
Who lost the latest? I asked, like one who must account for theft on a road. Marta's spoon paused over the pot, then resumed. The innkeeper wiped a mug that did not need wiping. The beekeeper smoothed the skep's wicker with his thumb. Havel said, "Weller's son." Not gone, not yet. Weller brought him back when Cox called, but the boy woke laughing at a joke no one told. He sleeps in the day now more than is proper for boys. Dreams in his mouth. What is the priest's counsel? More candles, said Rope Palms, eyes still closed. It could have been humour, it was not. And ribbon for a name that should have been shorter. He said they named the boy a river, and the river loves what is named after it. Names like doors, the beekeeper murmured. Some swing, some stick, some open on rooms no man built. The innkeeper put another log on the coals and did not look up. "You'll go," he said to me with neither question nor command. "Up the bank. When the fog thickens, the priest will be at his table." "I'll go," I said. "We'll pour for you when you return," he said. "If you return. Not because we are afraid for you, because it is what hands do when someone comes out of fog with air in his lungs." A small laugh ran around the room and hid. Havel folded the rope he had brought and put it on a peg as carefully as if it were a guest's coat. Marta stacked bowls whose edges had been chipped by years without becoming sharp. The lute player tucked his instrument into a burlap sleeve like a sleeping child. The door opened and let a slice of fog across the floor. It found my boots, climbed a finger's breadth up the leather, and went no farther. The medallion quivered once, a moth's wing against the collarbone, and was still. I stood. Coins exchanged hands, light against light. Their ring on the plank was a sound the room trusted. The innkeeper's fingers closed over them and did not count. We had already counted more important things. Outside, the ferry's lantern had decided to be a moon again and not a star. Its light sheeted across the barge and made the water look like silk laid wrong side up. The mare lifted her head in the stall, hearing the change men never hear. I saddled her. Leather remembered the shape of work and cooperated. At the yard's edge, a notice board leaned under Rain's old grammar. 2 bits of parchment rattled, pinned with nails that had lost the habit of biting. One named a thief no one had seen. One named a day in spring when a calf would be led through the lanes, so that hands might feel the price of milk before milk was poured. Neither mentioned fog. Fog writes its own notices in lungs and leaves. I mounted. From the ferry, Rope Palms called. If she balks at the reed beds, give her the reins. She knows where the ground is better than we do. I gave him a hand's height in thanks and turned upriver. The road along the bank was narrow, braided where many feet had decided to be clever and then decided otherwise. Older roots knuckled through the path. Water shone through last year's leaves. The fog grew confident, the way a liar grows confident when the room nods. It rose to the mare's knees, the mare's shoulder, then fell again, as if remembering manners. Far ahead, where the river bent, I saw the shape of the barn that wasn't, now a darker square against a lighter dark. A candle burned within, honey yellow, steady. Behind me, the inn sank back into itself. Voices thinned, then settled. A chair found its corner. A door remembered its fit. The world chose, as it always chooses, to behave as if it had not been listened to too closely. The mare walked, her ears flicked forward, then toward me, then forward again. The medallion did not stir. My right hand knew the weight of the hilt at my back, and my left knew the reins, and between them the road kept its counsel. Fog lapped at my boots. Somewhere near the bend, a child laughed in his sleep. Thin, bright, not frightened, not waking. The sound floated across the water and lost its way among the reeds. I could not say whether it had come from a house or from the fog itself, remembering a voice it had kept. The candle in the barn steadied. A figure moved behind it, tall and careful, arranging light as a man arranges oranges at market so they look like more than they are. He would have ribbons ready. He would have names. He would have a way of speaking that turned fear into duty and duty into purchase. I rode toward the place where talk becomes asking, and asking becomes a price. The herbalist lived on the rise above the river, her cottage bent under hazel branches and smoke curling from the roof. Bundles of mint and valerian hung by the door, a warning and a welcome both. Inside, jars lined the shelves, the air sharp with roots and leaf. She was neither young nor old, her eyes slate grey, her voice calm. "You've seen the priest?" she said before I spoke, "and you know his ribbons are leashes." "He ties names," I said. "He ties fear," she replied. "The barrow is older than him, older than prayers. It remembers the dead who were never given back properly. He only learned how to stand between memory and the living. He is not the source, nor the cure. He is only a door." She poured tea, bitter at first, sweet after. "The fog will offer you rest, and you will want it. Take this." She pressed a small paper into my hand. "It will not protect you, only remind you that you still have breath to spend." "And what will the barrow want?" I asked. "Something carried with service and memory both. Something freely given." Her eyes fell to the medallion at my chest. I left with the paper folded at my belt, the mare waiting by the door, ears restless. The woman's last words followed me into the dusk. "Do not go proud. Go honest. Pride asks for witnesses. Duty does not." The field rose as if it wanted to see the river and could not make up its mind whether to stand. At the crest, the barrow broke the line of the horizon, the way a knuckle breaks cloth when a fist curls beneath it. 3 stones kept watch. Their faces had been scored by frost and the habits of boys with knives. Lichen traced maps upon them, continents only snails and the dead could read. The fog thickened around the base. It did not climb the stones. It respected them,
the way water respects a mill wheel, even as it conspires to wear it down. Between the stones, the ground had hardened into something like a bowl. In it, the air trembled, as if the night had a fever. I dismounted and let the reins fall long. The mare found a patch of grass that did not taste wrong, and pretended to believe that all grass tastes the same. I walked the last distance, and stopped where the earth told me to stop. The medallion ticked once. I touched it. The metal was cool. It always is when you most want it to be warm. I set a sign in the air with 2 fingers, a habit left over from masters who taught me that names keep more than people do. The air acknowledged it, the way a gate acknowledges an old key, with reluctance and a click too quiet for anyone else to hear. The lullaby came up from the soil, not through the ear at first, through the bones of the feet, the long bones of the shins, the hinge at the knee, a hum that knew what marrow was for. It reached the lungs and made of breathing a thing to be negotiated. Perhaps now, perhaps in a moment. What is the hurry? Have you not worked enough today? Then it found the ear and pretended to be mercy. I sat on my heels because standing felt like a lie. The barrow did not stand, so why should I? I untied the herbalist's paper from my belt and tipped its pinch of dust into my mouth, then chased it with water that had remembered tin. The dust corrected nothing and promised less. It only berated my tongue for enjoying the idea of rest. Names moved. You cannot hear a name until it is given. These were not given. They had edges like stones in a pocket, the smoothness of having been handled too often. They bumped against one another and made a music that would have been a comfort if comfort had been the purpose. It was not. I lay my palm against the soil between the stones. It was not cold, it was storehouse warm, the kind of warmth that grain keeps for itself in a dark bin. Footsteps sounded behind me, the small, careful steps of someone who has been told not to go and is going. You should not be here, I said without turning. I know, said the girl with the flax braid. Her voice was practiced neutral, the way one speaks to cattle when salt is involved. But if you go where the fog talks and there is no one to listen to you, you begin to say yes to things you don't mean. I turned then. She had come without shoes, and the fog had written its lines across her ankles. She held a candle, unlit. The wick's tip had been pinched and blackened. What do they call you? I asked. They do not, she said. Then, as if realizing the cruelty of it, she added, Ilsa. My mother called me Ilsa when she remembered. When she doesn't, she calls me her sister. The priest writes my name correctly in the book every time. I watch him. He makes sure I watch him. You should be indoors, I said. No, she said, and the word was a plank laid true. Inside, it talks. She crouched beside me without asking permission and set the unlit candle carefully upon the soil. The way she kept her fingers from the wick told me she was used to flame and never wasted it. What do you hear? She asked. Names, I said. Do they want something? They want to be tied, I said, surprising myself with the accuracy of the answer. Not to be remembered. To be tied. My father tied boats, she said.
He said tying is not the same as keeping. Tying is the same as delaying. She pressed her lips together, a handful of years looking older than they had any right to. He slept by the door last winter on a night when the fog was bold. The priest sang, and my father smiled in his sleep and said the word for my grandmother's bread. And in the morning he cried because he had not said my name instead.
Where is he now? In the house, she said, not sleeping. He does not sleep, in case he dreams. The lullaby pressed harder. It is more difficult to tell yourself the truth when the truth is heavier than a blanket. I set my hand flat. The ground answered with a shiver like a horse settling its weight under a rider. Go back, I said. Tell your father to light a candle and put it between his eyes and not to look at it. Tell him to speak your name and then say it wrong and then say it right again until his mouth gets tired of choosing. Tell him to drink bitter tea and to stop pretending he is brave. Brave men sleep improperly. She nodded once. She did not move. Ilsa. Yes. Go. She went the way a cat leaves a room, already part of the next place before you think to watch for it. The air shifted. The lullaby sharpened at the edges, as if it had noticed disobedience and had decided to try kindness again. In it, I heard a woman hum while lifting water from a well. I heard a soldier count footfalls so he would not count men. I heard a boy laugh in his sleep and say the word for blackberries. The fog would have me all the small mercies I have earned and all the larger ones I never will. It would have me ease. I know, I said to it. So do I. I drew my knife and with its tip scored a line in the packed earth from one stone to the next. A childish act. Children's acts are sometimes the only ones that matter. The lullaby altered. It shifted a half note lower, as if sulking or reconsidering the shape of the bowl between the stones. Behind me, a sound, the crisp, deliberate step of a man who wants to arrive before he is seen arriving. I did not turn. You chose a strange place to rest, said the priest, and his voice tried the shape of kindness first. Rest is cheap here, I said, and rightly priced. He came to stand where he could look down at the line I had cut. Scratching the earth is a child's gesture. A child knows where the world begins, I said. We forget. He glanced toward the path down which Ilsa had vanished. Children also learn to obey, or they learn to listen, I said. The two are not the same. He let the silence serve him for a time. In it, the lullaby did his bidding. It softened, became almost absent, retreated just enough to make men grateful for its return. The trick of hunger. You cannot cut fog with a blade, he said at last. No, I said. I can cut bargains. This one has too many words on one side and too much quiet on the other. He laughed. It was not unhandsome. You will draw another line, and another, and fence the dead as if they were goats who dislike a ditch. I have a better fence. Names tied to light, ribbons pinned to doors, order that can be taught to hands. I have seen your fence, I said. It keeps the living inside. Where else would you like them? He asked softly. Outside, where the river takes them without song? We stood with our feet in the bowl and our heads under sky that had neglected stars tonight, so it could see what we would do. The fog breathed when we did. The mare lifted her head and let it fall again. You will come to the shrine, he said, and you will lay down the weight you carry and allow me to tie a name to it. You have no one to pray for you. Allow us to learn how to do it properly. You ask for my name, I said. I ask for your obedience, he said,
dropping the borrowed gentleness. Names follow. The lullaby stroked the back of the neck. It knows where labor lives. It offered again the soft hand. I set my teeth against it and breathed through the herbs the woman had given me. Tomorrow, I said, because men of his kind collect tomorrows the way misers collect coins. At dusk, when lamps forget whether they are moons. He smiled a true smile then, the kind a man gives when he has bridged an argument without breaking it. Dusk, he said. He turned and went away with the step of a man who considers himself gracious. The bowl between the stones held the last of the lullaby like a cup holds water after lips leave it. In its tremor I heard no threat, only invitation. I knelt and pressed my palm again to the soil. You'll have what you're owed, I said, not aloud, not to ears, but not the hand that has been feeding you while claiming to be your tongue. The fog did not answer. It does not need to. It has time. I stood, went to the mare, and put my forehead briefly against the warm place where her jaw becomes her neck. She breathed apple and damp and patience at me. We went down from the rise toward the village, where lights made coins under shutters, and the river moved as it has always moved, forward, even when it remembers. Dusk came the way debt comes, quietly, then all at once. The lane filled with that hour's peculiar grey, when lamps doubt themselves, and doors think of closing. The barn that wasn't wore its ribbons like scars. Candles had been set ready in their clay cups, wicks trimmed close, as if the night were a guest that might be offended by extravagance. People arrived in twos and threes, not because they had been told to, but because the road between fear and habit is short. Havel stood in the doorway, rope around his forearm like a memory. Marta near the hearth with her spoon, though she had brought no pot. The beekeeper had a smear of wax at his thumb. Ilsa kept to the lintel's shadow, braid wound tight, candle unlit. The priest was already at his table. His book lay open to a page where damp had puckered lines into waves. Beside it waited coils of ribbon and the small knife he used to cut virtue to length. He had lit no candles yet. He let the room light itself with its own wanting. You came, he said when I entered, and made it sound like courtesy I owed him. I said I would. You'll lay down your weight, he said, so that a name may be tied to it. Not yours, no. You are a traveller. You are an instrument, not a house. But a ribbon about your wrist will make the fog remember its manners while you go to the barrow. It will keep you honest. He said the last word like a man staking a claim on land he hadn't surveyed. Honesty, I said, is to call a leash a leash. He did not blink. What matters is that it works. He reached for the knife. His fingers were deft, practiced. They sought a red ribbon and drew it across the blade with a sigh. My work, he said to the room more than to me, is to keep order. There are those who think chaos kinder because it smiles. I know better. I tie what must be tied. I bind what would wander. I weigh what would be miscounted. And when you have tied enough knots, I said, the rope believes itself the river. He placed the ribbon in my open palm. The fabric was warm from his fingers, and it stank of wax and breath that had not learned to leave a mouth when it should. I let it rest there. I did not close my hand. Do it, said a woman near the wall, Weller's wife. Her voice shook as barns shake in wind that hasn't yet decided to be a gale. If it keeps the fog from my boy's lungs, do it. "It will," the priest said, soft certainty coming easily to him. "Light obeys when love forgets." He lifted a candle cup from the row and held it without lighting. The room leaned toward him as wheat leans toward the hand that scythes it. He waited a heartbeat longer than necessary. A good tradesman lets the customer name their hunger before he names his price. "Names," he said, and set his fingertips to the book. "We begin with those that stray the quickest." He drew breath to sing. I moved, not quickly, not with steel. I only lifted my free hand and set it on the edge of his book. The leather crinkled. The page quivered like the flank of a beast that knows a touch it will not accept. "No," I said. The word reached neither above nor below talk. It sat at its own height and refused to come down or go up. He looked into my eyes then and let me see for an instant the hollowness the voice had filled for him. He did not yank the book. He did not smile. He examined his anger the way a smith examines a crack in a blade, quickly, expertly, and set it aside. "You bring danger," he said, quieter than before. "You bring it with the confidence of a man who can leave with it after it has done its work." "I bring light that isn't for sale," I said, and turned my shoulder to the room. "Havel," I said without looking, "lend me your hands." Rope left the man as a snake leaves a skin. He came forward, not because he believed me more than the priest, but because he had made a habit of taking orders when men stood in doorways. "Hold this open," I said, and slid the book under his palms. He held it as he might have held a plank across a ford. "Marta." She was already moving, spoon forgotten, apron to her wrist. "Pinch the wicks flat." She went from cup to cup and bruised each little tail of flame that might have been, pressing them down into the wax so they would not rise too quickly when told. "Beekeeper," I said. He lifted his head, surprised to be summoned by anything but bees. "Your knife." He gave it. It was small and very clean. I set the priest's ribbon across the grain of the table and cut it in two. A sound went through the room, the sound of wax breaking under a thumb. Not shock. Recognition. The priest's smile returned, made of patience now, not warmth. "Theatrics," he said. "You think to shame me in my house. But necessity cannot be shamed. It repeats itself until men learn to be grateful." "Repeat this," I said, and touched the book's page with my forefinger. The ink had bled in the damp and then dried into spiderwork. It would not lift with a blade or soak with spit. It had become the paper's memory. "Read," I said, and looked at Ilse. "You." She did not step from the lintel's shadow. She did not need to. She spoke her name first, clearly, as if checking that her mouth still owned it. Then she read the names on the open page, one by one, even the ones the water had gnawed until they were more stain than letter. Her voice did not tremble. It only lengthened slightly on a syllable now and then, the way a hand lingers on a plank that has splintered. When she finished, I looked back at the priest. "These are not prayers," I said. "They are receipts." He did not deny it. He lacked the insult for me at that moment, because a better insult had risen to his tongue. "What do you offer instead?" "Return," I said. "Not a leash." Letting go, I placed the cut ribbon on the book's spine where the names lay, then closed the covers on it and bound the whole with Havel's rope. The rope took the knot as if grateful. "Bring it," I said. "All of it." He did not move. He would not touch it. Havel lifted the bound ledger as a man lifts a stone that has sat in a field too long, and the room made way. Marta took 3 candle cups and inverted them. Their wicks wept a single bead and were done. The beekeeper gathered the uncut ribbon coils and set them atop the closed book, like flowers that did not know they had been taken from the grave. We went out together, the way men carry a bier, slow, practiced without rehearsal. The fog met us at the threshold and stepped back one pace the way dogs do when they cannot decide whether a man bears food or trouble. The priest followed. He spoke no word to stop us. He did not need to. He had the certainty of a man who believes he is necessary. Such men think the world will refute the insult for them. We crossed the yard. The lane received us. Doors opened the width of a hand, then wider. A boy at one threshold held his fingers to his lips, as if he had found a secret and was deciding whether to keep it. The river breathed its old breath. The barrow rose against the dark, its stones remembering their work. We climbed. The bowl between the stones held dusk like a cup holds last water. Fog lay around the barrow's base, quiet as wool. The lullaby began almost before our feet found the higher ground. It came up through the legs again, through the hinge of the knees, into the lungs. It told each rib to rest. It told each thought to wait its turn and then not bother coming at all. Havel set the bound ledger down within the ring of stones. It looked smaller there, like coin laid upon an altar that expects jewels. Marta placed the 3 inverted candles beside it. The beekeeper, uncertain of what he had brought into the rite, laid the ribbon coils down last, and then stepped back with a hand on his chest, as though he had felt a sting and wanted to remember where. The priest stopped at the bowl's edge. "Careful," he said softly to the village as much as to me. "Careful." The dead do not like to be contradicted. They pinch names, I said to the ground, not to him. You were kept. You were tallied. You were bartered for quiet you did not ask to give. The lullaby changed. A note like a breath taken in surprise ran through it. It deepened, becoming older and less smooth, as if it had remembered that it had learned to be kind only lately. I unbuckled the strap at my collarbone. Leather creaked. The sound of years doing as they were told. The medallion fell into my palm with the weight of a small truth. The wolf's head was worn where fingers go when thought is elsewhere. Silver glinted like ice in a wall of snow. It had saved me before I knew enough to thank it. It had steadied my hand when steel was not steady. It had made the world honest, telling me when magic crept through weeds in the shape of dew. The herbalist's words return, not as a command, but as a line that fits the grain. Something that carries memory and service together. I looked over my shoulder once, not to the priest, to the village, which now stood in a ragged ring beyond the fog line. Ilse was there, candle unlit, braid like a cord that held more than the hair. Havel's rope had tightened upon his arm, as if it feared being set down. Marta had her spoon still in her hand. "Price," I said aloud, so the stones would not mistake what was being offered. The priest stepped forward, smile returned, manner set to benevolent. "At last," he said, "a reasonable man." "Be quiet," Marta said, and the spoon made the only sound he feared, the sound of ordinary work rebuking ceremony. I went to the central stone, the tallest, whose face had been used for sharpening in the days when men brought edges here, believing they would learn something about straightness. The lullaby thrummed. It offered rest, like a fruit offered to a starving hand. It offered everything except waking. I set the medallion upon the stone, silver-kissed old granite. The wolf lay still, mouth open in its perpetual silent counsel. "Names," I said again, not raising my voice, but letting it go deeper, into the place where bones hear better than ears. "You were kept. I return you." I drew a sign in the air, odd, simple, not force so much as refusal, and pushed it down through the medallion into the stone, into the earth. The ground knew the sign. It is older than men's alphabets. The ledger's rope twanged once. The wax tears upon the candle cups softened a fraction. The lullaby faltered, then gathered itself and returned stronger. It showed me a winter fire and a bowl of thick stew. It showed me Kaer Morhen's hall and the shape of a chair where a friend had always sat. It showed me a boy's small hands holding silver that was not a medallion, and believing it anyway. I put my left hand on the wolf's head, palm flat. Its cold went through skin and found a faster beat beneath. My right hand found the hilt across my shoulder, not to draw, but to remember what weight meant. Not kindness, I said to the song, not sleep. Names I pressed until the edges of the medallion bit. A clean, small pain against the larger one the lullaby promised to remove. Then, with breath steadied the way a man steadies a plank across a gap, I let go. I did not cast it. I did not lift it high as if for show. I only took my hand away. The wolf remained upon the stone, for the time it takes a candle to admit it is a candle. Then it trembled, as it has trembled 1,000 times against my chest, and the tremor found the stone, and the stone found the earth, and the earth took it. It did not sink like coin into mud. It went as if cleaned by a magnet below, steady, hungry, sure. The silver brightened once, just once, and was gone, leaving only a round, paler scuff where metal had kissed. The lullaby broke, not into silence, into many voices, none loud. A low woman's hum, a child's question answered, a man's unfinished curse that turned into laughter because a horse had stumbled and not fallen. They were not the dead. They were the living at the hour before dawn, in a village that remembers it has hands. Havel took a breath as if the rope around his arm had loosened. Marta's spoon dropped and clanged against the stone with the precise tune of tin. The beekeeper started to cry without embarrassment. Bees do not mock, and he had learned their customs. The fog did not flee, it settled, it became weather again, not will. It lay where hollows told it to lie and did not lift its small fingers to touch mouths that were none of its business. Along the riverbank, shadows that had been too careful became merely longer. Dogs remembered their work and barked once, then twice, the way a village reminds itself it exists. The priest stared at the pale scuff on the stone. The expression he wore was not rage. Rage has teeth. This had none. It was vacancy. A man whose trade had been to stand between two things discovered those two things could meet without him. "You've broken it," he said, very softly, and for the first time the voice was his own. "No," I said. "I returned it." His gaze flicked to the bound book. The rope tied it, the ribbons crowned it, the candles waited. He took one step toward it and then stopped, discovering that his foot no longer belonged to the ground by right. He was not exiled, he was unnecessary. Havel picked up the book and held it toward the crowd. "Who wants theirs back?" he asked, like a man offering coats after a storm. Hands lifted. He did not distribute the names, he carried the whole to the herbalist's rise in the morning, and she would keep it there until each person came to take what was theirs to keep, or to burn. Ilse looked at the scuff on the stone a long time. Her candle remained unlit in her hand. "Thank you," she said, though she did not look at me when she said it. She said it to the stone, perhaps, or to her own mouth, which had found how to carry her name without being paid. We went down from the barrow in a long, unravelling line. Doors open, the smell of porridge spread like prayer. Somewhere a cock rejected the hymn he had been practicing and sang the old one instead. Children woke not laughing and not crying, but asking for bread. I stood where the lane met the river and watched the ferryman's lantern stop pretending to be a moon and become a lamp again. The fog leaned its shoulder against the posts and considered the current like an old friend who no longer wished to give advice. The priest remained by the stones until it was very dark. Then he walked down alone, carrying nothing, and turned upriver, not toward his shrine, but toward the far fields where night keeps its other roads. No one called after him. No one closed the door in his face. He folded himself into the country that had made him, and the country accepted him without oath or ribbon. Morning came pale and honest. Smoke lifted from rooftops like sentences begun and then finished properly. A child chased a dog that did not need chasing. Somewhere a woman laughed with a sound that had not lived here in months because it had required waking to make it. The river moved as it had always moved, forward, unhurried by anyone's need. I went first to the herbalist. Her door was open. Steam made the air polite. The cat lay where the sun found the table. The ledger sat upon a stool, rope still binding it, ribbons like a crown a child had forgotten to wear. "You did a thing that cost," she said, pouring without asking. The tea was bitter and then kind, as before. "It bought what was due," I said. She touched the rim of the cup to mine. "Bring me my payment." I set the ribbon, the priest's, the one I had refused, upon her palm. It looked smaller here, as if distance diminished it the way heat diminishes wax. "I have nothing to tie," I said. She folded the ribbon twice, then twice again, until it was a small red square, the colour of rose hips after frost. She tucked it into a jar on a high shelf where only dust kept counsel. "You do," she said. "You tied the end of a song to its beginning. That is what mending is. We shared the quiet that work leaves behind when it does not need thanks." When I rose to go, she added, almost as an afterthought, "You'll miss it." "The medallion," I said. "You'll reach for it in the dark and find you have hands," she replied. "Some nights that will be enough. Some nights it will not. Come for tea on those outside." Ilse waited on the path with her candle still unlit and a loaf under her arm. She held it out, serious as a witness. "For the road," she said. "For yours." "It will stale by noon," I said. "It will still be bread," she said. And that argument has no answer. Her father stood in the doorway and nodded, not at me, but at the fact that a man can leave a place without owing it anything, except the courtesy of remembering it properly. I saddled the mare in a yard that had remembered the sound of leather. Havel came from the inn and handed me a water skin. "For when river closes its teeth," he said. Rope was no longer wound to his forearm. It hung from his belt, useful and not proud. Marta wiped flour from her hands and pressed 2 apples into my palm, as if returning coins exact to the last shaving. At the edge of the village, the priest's shrine stood with its door open. Ribbons still hung there, but no new ones. Candles sat in their cups with wicks reborn tall. The book's absence made a space that let light through. The place was again what the beams had wanted to be, a barn with patience enough to shelter work. I paused, not to bless it, not to curse it, only to see it as it was. Then I turned to the road.
The mare felt the change before I did. The absence of the small tap at the collarbone when the world grew strange, the missing coin of certainty. I put my hand to the place where the medallion had always lain. There was nothing to lift, only the shape memory makes of weight. I kept my hand there a moment longer, and then let it fall to the reins. The river followed, then veered away. The alders thinned, the path widened. Above, sky showed itself honestly blue where it had been grey for so long the mind had forgotten. There are deeds that end in applause, and there are deeds that end in work. This one ended in bread and steam and doors opening at proper hours. Children woke to their own names. Men learned again the shape of sleep they could earn. The dead kept theirs. The road did what roads do. It declined to praise or remember. It only went on. I went with it, lighter by one weight and heavier by another. Somewhere ahead another knot waited. Somewhere a field had mistaken fog for forgiveness and would need teaching. Somewhere a hand would reach for a medallion and find only skin and a different kind of truth. The mare walked. Her ears read the world. My palms learned anew the reins. Behind me, a village breathed like a man who knows the price of his breath and pays it daily without a priest to count for him. The fire of last night had collapsed into ash hours ago. The spark of the tale lived exactly as long as it needed to. Long enough to wake what slept and to leave the rest to daylight. The road ahead held its patience. I kept mine.